If the narcissist will never change, then what are you left to fix within yourself? There often comes a moment, quiet, heavy, and unavoidable, when you finally ask yourself, what exactly am I trying to change here? Not the wishful fantasy of the relationship, not the version you once believed existed, but something real, tangible, measurable. For many survivors of narcissistic abuse, depression grows from this very crossroads, the slow dawning realization that no matter how much you hoped, waited, rationalized, or reshaped yourself, the narcissistic person is not changing. Psychologists describe this moment as cognitive dissonance collapse, when reality finally overrides the fantasy and your nervous system feels both relief and grief at once. For a long time, you may have believed that if you communicated clearly enough, calmly enough, lovingly enough, the relationship could shift. You tried explaining. You tried patience. You tried empathy. You tried emotional transparency. But nothing changed, not because you failed, but because, as clinical psychologist Dr. Ramani Durvasula notes, narcissistic personality structures resist accountability, empathy, and introspection. They are designed to maintain power, not connection. So the question becomes more focused and more painful. What exactly do you want to change? Most survivors first name emotional pain. I want this to feel better. But healing requires specificity. Psychologists often encourage journaling the answer, not as a wish list, but as a clarity map. Because when you write it down, the truth becomes unavoidable. The changes you desire are not vague, they are deeply behavioral. Perhaps you want them to stop mocking your body or appearance. Maybe you want them to stop calling you crazy, dramatic, or too sensitive when you express a basic human emotion. You may crave something as small, yet monumental, as them helping around the house without being asked. You may long for them to stop policing your time, demanding explanations for every minute you breathe independently. You may want the secrecy, the flirtations, the digital infidelity to stop, not because you're possessive, but because betrayal wounds the nervous system like infection. A psychologist would call these boundaries, not demands, and your desire for them is proof that your emotional instincts are still alive. Then there are deeper requests, less measurable, yet more heartbreaking. I want them to care about me. I want them to be proud of me. I want to feel seen, valued, safe. I want them to stop acting inconvenienced by my existence. These longings reveal something essential. You are not simply asking for behavioral modification. You are asking for an emotional foundation the narcissistic system is not designed to provide. As trauma therapist Pete Walker explains, victims of narcissistic abuse often seek emotional repair from the same person who created the wound, because the nervous system confuses familiarity with safety. And here is the brutal psychological truth. If a person consistently refuses empathy, accountability, reciprocity, or emotional presence, the relationship cannot heal, regardless of how much effort you invest. This realization leads to another painful emotional shift: resentment, exhaustion, and numbness. After asking for change repeatedly, softly, directly, through conversations, texts, long letters, or desperate arguments, you begin to internalize their indifference. When your requests are dismissed, minimized, mocked, or ignored, your psyche absorbs a dangerous message. My needs do not matter. My voice doesn't matter. Maybe I don't matter. From a clinical lens, this is not weakness, it is trauma conditioning. The nervous system adapts to survive unpredictability by shrinking its needs. Depression becomes less an emotion and more a survival adaptation, a freeze response protecting you from further rejection. So where does healing begin? It begins with a shift in the question. Not, how do I get them to change? But, how do I change the way I participate in this dynamic? Psychologists recommend 3 crucial steps. Keycap 1: name the reality without apologizing. Write the behaviors, not the hopes. Facts interrupt denial. This is not cruelty, it is clarity. Keycap 2: rebuild internal safety. Regulate your nervous system through grounding exercises, trauma-informed therapy, self-compassion practices, reconnecting with supportive, safe humans. Safety must exist internally before it can exist relationally. Keycap 3, accept what is, not what you wished it would be. This is the hardest part because it requires grieving the person you imagined, not the person you lived with. Acceptance is not giving up. It is the doorway to power. There comes a moment in every painful relationship cycle when the question shifts, not from how do I make this better, but to something far more uncomfortable, far more honest. What if this never changes? This shift matters because it interrupts the fantasy loop many survivors unknowingly cling to. The belief that one more conversation, one more compromise, one more sacrifice will finally inspire responsibility, empathy, or accountability. But when the same patterns repeat, broken promises, dismissive reactions, constant excuses, emotional neglect, defensive deflection, the emotional truth becomes difficult to avoid. And so the real inquiry becomes, if their behavior remains exactly as it is, tomorrow, next month, 5 years from now, what am I going to do? That question isn't meant to punish you. It's meant to free you. When change isn't coming, the psychological reality. If someone repeatedly avoids accountability, weaponizes excuses, and refuses to repair damage they caused, that isn't poor communication. It's a relational pattern rooted in entitlement, emotional immaturity, and sometimes narcissistic defense mechanisms. Many partners eventually find themselves caught in a loop. You talk, you explain, you wait, you hope. Nothing shifts. You end up feeling unheard, unseen, minimized, sometimes even questioning your sanity. The helplessness grows not because you're weak, but because you're holding on to possibility rather than reality. So what happens if nothing changes? Imagine they continue, sneaking around on social media, breaking promises with no remorse, dismissing your boundaries, interrupting when you speak, playing victim when confronted. How does knowing this, not guessing, not hoping, shape your emotional and practical decisions? This is where radical acceptance enters, not as resignation, but as clarity. Psychologists' guidance, what radical acceptance looks like. If you've exhausted communication and nothing has shifted, the next step is not more effort. It's adjusting expectations to match reality. That adjustment may look like disengaging emotionally when conversations become disrespectful or invalidating, planning a plan B instead of trusting unreliable promises, sharing less of your inner world when vulnerability becomes a weapon used against you, creating internal boundaries when external ones are ignored. For some, this adjustment allows survival inside the relationship. For others, it becomes the turning point that makes leaving possible. When the change you want is emotional, not behavioral. And then there's the deeper ache, the longing not for tasks, but for connection. I want them to care. I want them to acknowledge harm. I want them to see me, not just use me. I want them to stop making themselves the victim. I want them to be accountable. These aren't requests for chores, they're requests for emotional maturity. And those qualities cannot be forced, bargained for, or earned. They require self-awareness, vulnerability, humility, and commitment to growth. Without therapy, introspection, and willingness, these deeper changes are unlikely. And even with therapy, change is slow, uncomfortable, and inconsistent. So again, the question returns. If those emotional needs never get met here, what then? Psychologist's path toward healing. You now face two internal roads. Stay with new expectations and safeguards. In this case, you may seek emotional nourishment elsewhere. Friends who listen, communities where your worth is reflected, a workplace where effort is seen. You stop hoping for emotional reciprocity where it cannot exist. Leave and begin rebuilding the self the relationship eroded. This option isn't easy, but it is possible with support systems, trauma-informed therapy, boundaries, self-worth reconstruction. Either path requires one critical ingredient. Backhand index pointing right, acknowledging what is real, not what you wish it could be. The hardest truth. They may never truly listen. They may never be accountable. They may never see you clearly, because that would require them to confront themselves. And so the power shifts not when they change, but when you do. Final psychological insight. Once you define what you need and acknowledge that they may never provide it, something shifts internally. The fog clears, the confusion lifts, and suddenly, you're no longer waiting. The decision becomes yours. Not easy, not painless, but finally yours. Because the most profound change in these relationships is not when they transform. It's when you stop hoping and start choosing.